Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary, and today's video is actually going to be one of my wrap-up videos for 2024. I believe this will be the first one that you are seeing, but I've already filmed another one, so I could be wrong about that. So today's video, I'm going to be doing the worst / most disappointing books that I read in 2024, and I'm actually going to spend a good chunk of this on books that I DNF'd because I actually didn't finish that many books that I did not like. I have DNF'd more books this year than I've ever DNF'd in the past. Like usually there'll be like 3 to 5, if that. I DNF'd 25 books in 2024 at various stages. Some of them I read like 300 pages. One of them I read 500 pages of it before saying, I don't want to finish this. So I'm going to go through those. A lot of them I read like a couple chapters and then was like, no. So I'm going to go through those. I'm going to explain sort of why I DNF'd them and how I felt about that. And then I will go through some of my lowest rated books that I read this year. I haven't actually looked, but I know that I read some books that I ended up giving like 2 stars or were really low 3 stars or just books that I was generally disappointed with. So without further ado, I have these in chronological order of when I DNF'd them. So some of them I wrote down the date or the month. A lot of them I didn't. So I can kind of guesstimate based on the other months around them. But the first book that I DNF'd is actually the first book I tried to read in 2024, and that was Peculiar Ground by Lucy Hughes Hallett. And this is a multi-generational story. It's not really a family story because it follows multiple families, but it's set on like one property. So in theory, I thought this was going to be really interesting. In practice, I thought it was very boring, and I was listening to it as an audiobook and I just couldn't keep track of who anybody was. I wasn't really vibing with the writing style, so I put this down in January. Again, I think I put it down on like January 1st or January 2nd. It was one of the first things that I tried to read and then was just like, this is not working for me. Then I DNF'd Whiskey in a Teacup, which is Reese Witherspoon's memoir. I was really sad about this. I read this for the X's and O's readathon in February. I DNF'd it because I was looking for like a memoir of her life, and I just felt like this was very much promoting her homewares brand, which is fine, but it's just not what I wanted. Like, I'm happy that she has a brand. It just wasn't really for me. I was expecting a lot more like quirky stories about growing up in the South and like stories about her relationship with Ryan Felipe and her like kids and what she's learned from motherhood and how being a mother in Hollywood has affected her, like stuff like that. And generally, it just wasn't any of that. So I think I got through like 2 chapters and then was like, this is not for me. And I need to finish a bunch of stuff for this readathon. So I'm putting this down. Then I put down The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker, which I think I read for the same readathon or tried to read for the same readathon. This is a nonfiction book about like gatherings, and I don't remember really anything about this. I just didn't like it, so I put it down. I also DNF'd Crime and Punishment. This one I vividly remember DNFing. I did not get very far in this, by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I apologize. I read 85 pages of this book, and there's a scene, it's again towards the very beginning, where a crowd of people is watching a man beat a horse to death, and I noped right out of it. I was like, I don't want to read this. I don't care that much. This is actually the second time I've tried to read Crime and Punishment. I don't remember that from the first time, but I tried to read it when I was in like early high school, maybe middle school. I might have been in like 8th grade, and it just was too much for me. It's a Russian classic. I decided I wasn't reading all that, and I put it down, and that was in May. So from February to May, that's how long I didn't DNF anything. And then also in May, I DNF'd And Now We Have Everything by Megan O'Connell, which is another memoir about a woman who had a baby and like felt very unprepared for motherhood. So I thought this was going to be interesting, and it just wasn't for me. I don't know what I thought it was. I genuinely thought it was going to be someone who like accidentally becomes a mother either when she's not in a relationship or like is just not in a place where she should have feels like she can have a baby. But it was about a woman who was like married and then gets pregnant and is like, I wasn't ready for motherhood, which maybe is relatable to some people, but it just wasn't what I expected. I didn't feel, and I just didn't like it. So I didn't finish it. I did not care. June, I DNF'd A Dance with Dragons by George R.R. Martin from the Game of Thrones series. I got pretty far in this one. I got like halfway, and then I sort of realized that I didn't care to finish it because the series is not finished, and I was like, if the other books ever come out, which I personally don't think they ever will. I never finished the show. I didn't care for it, so I didn't finish watching it. That was the other thing. Game of Thrones just really wasn't a series for me, unfortunately. I just didn't like it. I don't know how else to say it. Like, there were a couple of perspectives that I really enjoyed, but the majority of the perspectives I didn't like. I didn't care about Cersei's perspective. I didn't care about Bren, the like female knight. She started when we stopped watching the show, or when I stopped watching the show. My husband has watched all of it and loved it. When I stopped watching the show, she was just becoming a character. Brienne of Tarth, is that her name? I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But like, I liked Catelyn towards the end. I didn't like her when she was first introduced that much. I like Jon Snow as a character. I found his like portions very boring, but I like wanted to root for him. Like, he was a character that I wanted to like more than I actually did. Loved Tyrion and loved Daenerys. Those are the parts that I cared about. If you've read the series, you know that the fourth book does not follow any of those perspectives. So the fourth book was all the bad perspectives, and I was like, why am I reading this? But I plowed through, and the fifth book is the same time period. It's like contemporaneous with the fourth book, but it's other people's perspectives, and it's perspectives I actually cared about. So I thought that I would enjoy the fifth book, but then it just felt really slow, and I just didn't really care for it. So it wasn't for me. I just didn't finish it. I also, in June, DNF'd River of Silver by S.A. Chakraborty, which is a short story collection that goes along with her Daevabad trilogy. I just didn't care. I really loved the first book in that series, and I didn't really like the way the series wrapped up. I mean, I would consider, I don't know, like, I almost want to reread it at some point because, like, maybe on reread, I would like the ending better. That's how I felt about the Scythe trilogy. I read it the first time and was very, like, lukewarm on the ending, but when I reread it in 2023, I guess, I ended up really liking it. So I mean, I'm not saying I would never revisit this series, but I read like 1.5 of the short stories in this collection, and I just had other things I wanted to read more, and I just didn't care. So I didn't finish it. These Truths by Jill Lepore, I also DNF'd in June. This is a 1,000-page history nonfiction book about like America. I DNF'd it at around 500 pages and decided that I wasn't interested in reading 1,000+ page nonfiction books. So I took all of the other ones that were over 500 pages off my TBR, except for Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent, because I do want to read that. And it's like 700 pages, I think. But I still have that on my list, so I don't know. I DNF'd Stephen King's memoir, On Writing. I didn't know this was a memoir. I thought this, well, okay. I thought that this was about like his writing career. And he kept telling stories about his childhood, and I did not want to read them. I didn't care. I DNF'd a lot of memoirs this year, because the next one I also DNF'd. I don't have dates for these, but I think it was July probably. I also DNF'd Born on the 4th of July by Ron Kovic, which is a memoir that's been made into a movie, I believe. And it's about a guy who fought in Vietnam, got injured in Vietnam, and then became like an anti-war pacifist political activist, I think. So I thought this sounded like up my alley. Oh boy, did I not care about it at all. It was very depressing, which like, okay, the subject matter, I could see why. But also like, it just didn't feel well written to me. And he would intersperse like his war injury stories with like stories of his childhood, and oh, I didn't like it. I did not finish that one. Does that make me a bad person? I don't know. You'll have to let me know. In July also, I guess, I DNF'd Protecting Piper by Cynthia Eden, which is a romance book. It's like an older brother's friend romance, I think, or like a best friend's older brother romance, I think is what it is. And I watched Bridgerton around this time and really liked the dynamic between Colin and Penelope of the like best friend's older brother or like older brother's best friend, like that kind of thing where they've like known each other since childhood. They weren't really friends, but like as they've gotten older, they've become friends and then they fall in love. Like that's what I was looking for. Protecting Piper, I think is supposed to be romantic suspense because the main character has like a stalker that breaks into her house. And then for whatever reason, the solution to that is that she has to move in with her best friend's older brother, who is like very alpha male, very like protective, very like snarky and rude to her. And like, I just didn't like it. He wasn't the type of hero that I like vibe with, I guess. So I DNF'd that one. I just wasn't feeling it. Then a book that I DNF'd almost immediately. So that one I DNF'd after like 2 chapters because I was like, I don't like him. I'm not vibing with this. In August, I DNF'd One for All by Lily Lainoff, sorry. And this is a Three Musketeers retelling with a female protagonist, and she is one of the Three Musketeers. I don't know. I didn't read that much of it. I read like a very small bit and just was like, okay, I'm not feeling this. This is not for me. It is YA. Gender swapped retellings that are YA I tend to not vibe with them. And I don't know really what that means. I think the writing style of this didn't work for me. And also like so much of the legwork or like the appeal for this story, I think for people is the gender swapping. And that's not necessarily an automatic appeal to me. So I want the book to be doing something more with it. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope that makes sense. Also in August, I DNF'd Machines Like Me by Ian McEwan. I can't remember why. I think it was just like feeling very meh. And either my library hold was about to be up or I had a bunch of other stuff that I was supposed to be reading. If I'm remembering correctly, I think I was reading this for a readathon. And no, I was reading it for the buzzword video. So I think I just got to the end of the month. I hadn't finished it yet and I scrapped it. I think that might be what happened. I can't exactly remember, but I think it was something like that. Then I DNF'd in September, I DNF'd Agent Running in the Field by John le Carre. This is a spy thriller, which I don't love inherently. I don't really like that. And then also it was set in like real world with real world politics being brought up and like real world politicians. And as soon as that happened, I was like, I'm out of here. I don't want to read this. So didn't work for me. I DNF'd a couple things in October. I DNF'd Welcome to Lagos by Chibundo Onuzo. This, I think I could have had better luck with if I think I was reading it for a readathon. I think this has the potential to be a book that I enjoyed. I just would have had to take more time with it than I was willing to put into it at that point. And it's about these like 3 different groups of people in Nigeria, I believe, and they're all converging in Lagos. But one of them is like a guy leaving the military, and that's like him, and then another guy he works with who is like a soldier. They run into like a rebel guy and he's in their group, and then there's another group of people that all meet on a bus and decide to like band together but they're not doing anything. It's just about these people's lives, and it's very character driven. And I also I could not get a grasp on who each character was, because there's also a character that like works for a newspaper that's printing things that are against the government. So like his family is very concerned for him. I don't know where it was going to go, but I just didn't care enough to find out. I also in October DNF'd Time is a Mother by Ocean Vuong. I listened to this as an audiobook because I don't really love poetry. I have loved the other Ocean Vuong that I read, which I'm not going to remember now. On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous. I really enjoyed that book. It brought me to tears at multiple times, and I listened to the audiobook, which Ocean Vuong reads. So that's the way I would recommend like listening to their stuff. But I didn't like the poetry even being read by the author. The way that poetry is read out loud, I don't enjoy. I don't like it. I don't know. So I listened to a very small portion of that and then was like, well, no, thank you. In November, I DNF'd the book of Cain and Margaret, and this was just too weird for me. So I was trying to read it on an airplane. It wasn't really holding my attention because I figured that would be the best place because I read a lot of ebooks when I travel. This is like really short stories that all feature characters named Cain and Margaret, and they're all set in concentration camps. Not concentration camps. Is that what they were called? Internment camps, Japanese internment camps during World War II. And yeah, I just thought it was too weird. Some of them are like magical. A lot of them had like a magical realism twist. Like in one of them, Cain is like a tiny man, and in another one, they're birds. And in another one, Margaret has a cricket that talks to her. And it just wasn't for me. I just didn't like it. I was not vibing with it at all. Then also in November, I DNF'd All We Were Promised by Ashton Lattimore. This is a historical fiction, and it was nominated in the Goodreads Choice Awards for Best Debut, I believe. And I did not really like the writing of it, so I sort of gave up. It's about this woman. I think it's while slavery is still a thing. She lives in Philadelphia, so which is a free state at the time. And she, I believe, is half black, half white. But her dad is white. And so she's living with her dad, and he's pretending like she's a servant so nobody knows that she's his daughter, ? And she gets involved in the abolition movement through a friend and starts going to meetings. And that's all I really remember about it. It was just not very good to me. I just didn't like it. Sorry. I shouldn't say it's not good. It just wasn't for me. Same for the next one, Icarus by Kay Ankrum. I only wanted to read this one because of the Goodreads Choice Awards, and then it didn't make it past the first round, so I put it down and it said, thank God. Then Backyard Chronicles is another book that I read because of the Goodreads Choice Awards. She's a historical fiction author, but she wrote a nonfiction book about like birding in her backyard, which I thought sounded like a really clever idea. I didn't like it, so I put it down. It just wasn't interesting to me, unfortunately. I also DNF'd One of Us Knows by Alyssa Cole. I read another Alyssa Cole book earlier this year, the one that came out in 2020, I think, with the gentrification thing, which I really enjoyed. I thought that was a really well done book. And so I gave this one a lot more time than I probably would have if it was an author I had not read from before and really enjoyed. But I just didn't like it. It's about a woman with DID who is going to become the caretaker at this island. And she gets to the island and sees like the house or like the mansion, castle, whatever it is that she's going to be caretaking. And it looks like her inside house. So apparently with DID, I don't know that much about it. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a clinician. I've just read 2 books now that feature it. And, well, I've read one and DNF one, sorry. But she's got like an inside house where all of her different, I can't remember what they call them, but the different personas live. And it's the same as this like house on this island. So I assumed that was going to be meaningful, but I didn't like it. So I put it down. Also in December, I DNF'd Want by Gillian Anderson. This was when I had out a bunch of books from my library's apps, which I'm still actually kind of going through because I put a ton of things on hold that were nominated in the Goodreads Choice Awards. This is a short story collection, essay collection, I guess, that Gillian Anderson, who is an actress, she's now known for Sex Education, but she was also in X-Files. I almost called it X Factor, which is an entirely different thing, but that's like what she was originally in. And then Sex Education, she plays Otis Milburn's mom, Dr. Milburn. So I don't know, I really like her, but I read this because she's compiled a bunch of people's sexual fantasies. She had a bunch of people all over the world write her letters with their sexual fantasies, and she compiled them into this book, or as a bunch of them. And I read like 4. And honestly, like, I'm glad this book exists, and I think it's a cool concept, but I didn't care that much about it. I think if I owned this book, I might read like 1 a day or something, but I got it from my library. I think I had like 3 days to read it, and I read through 3 and was like, it's not gonna happen, so I returned it. I also in December decided to DNF Children of Blood and Bone, primarily because most people don't like the sequels, and I just wasn't really vibing with it. This is an African-inspired fantasy, I think. Now that I'm saying that, I know I DNF'd another thing that I didn't talk about, so I'll come back to that. I think, like, I was interested in this for a long time, the series, but I think my interest has waned over the years, and I just wasn't really that into it, so I DNF'd it. Going back to October, I forgot to talk about this. I DNF'd A Song of Wraiths and Ruins by Roseanne A. Brown in October, which is another African-inspired fantasy, West African-inspired fantasy. I got about a third. I don't think I was quite halfway, but I was close to halfway. And I just, like, was listening to it as an audiobook. I just didn't really care. It's a YA fantasy. I couldn't really tell you much more about it than that. I know there's, like, there's, like, a gated city that these kids are trying to get in, but you need a certain passport and identification. And one of the kids wishes for it and then ends up owing a debt to this like god creature demon thing. And as collateral, they take one of the siblings. And so the other siblings are trying to work together to get them back. And there's like a plot to kill the crown princess. And I just didn't care enough to finish it. So I didn't end up finishing that. Interestingly enough, sci-fi and fantasy just haven't really been drawing me in as much this year as I would like them to. So I don't know what that's about. But the last thing I DNF'd in 2024 is The Forever War by Joe Hildeman. This is a classic sci-fi. And I should have known from the title that it was going to be about intergalactic war and training for that. And those are things that I don't care for. So I didn't care for this. It also, like, it's weird because it's set in the future, obviously. And but it's like very Vietnam coded, if you know what I mean. Like if you've ever seen a movie set like around Vietnam with like soldiers, that, but just in space, which was just a weird vibe, which I think it was written around that time, so that makes sense. But also like there are women on the front lines with them in this like space camp learning how to be intergalactic warriors or whatever. But the guys are like always talking about like sleeping with the different women, and the women have no personality, which I know is like just kind of a side effect of when it was written. But for me, that's just not interesting with all the options that we have to read. Like, why waste my time with something that I'm just genuinely like not enjoying, and also like feels that, I hate to say it feels unrealistic because it reminds me of that. I think it was Dane Cook, but my sister and my mom loved him 20 years ago. Is that how long it's been? Probably. I was like, well, I might have been like 12. So what is that? 17 years ago. He had this bit where he talked about going to see Superman in theaters, and they watched the whole movie. And at the end of the movie, there's a scene where Superman gets shot and the bullet, like, it does a close-up zoom and the bullet hits him in the eye and then bounces off. And Dane Cook said the guy behind him scoffed and said, yeah, right. And I don't know. That's how I feel when I say that, like, certain things in fantasy books are unrealistic, because I'm like, okay. I know there's magic in this world, but this is unrealistic, you know? But anyways, I DNF'd that. And that's the last thing that I DNF'd. So now I'm going to talk about books that I didn't like that much. And there's not very many. So hopefully this won't take super long. As predicted, I did not give a single book 1 star this year, because any book that I was going to give 1 star, I DNF'd. I did give several 2 stars though, apparently. So first, Into the Forest by Jean Hegland. This is interesting to me. I did not remember giving this 2 stars. I thought I gave it 3. And my review just says, I don't think I get it, because I don't think I get it. I really enjoyed this movie. I think Elliot Page is in the movie. It's a very quiet post-apocalyptic story, or like not even post, but like current apocalyptic story, if that makes sense. So like something has happened. These people live in California. They live, it's 2 daughters and their parents. And they live in this kind of like remote town surrounded by like trees and forests and mountains. And they're close to like into town. So they used to go into town. And like one of the daughters is really into ballet. The other daughter has this like boyfriend that she likes, or this boy that she likes. So it's like sort of he's becoming her boyfriend, I guess. And then they're back in their remote town, and suddenly like they end up, I think they go to town and they see that like no one is there, or like the electricity goes out, the grid is down, like all this stuff is happening, and it's them trying to deal with it. Their parents end up dying, and they're trying to, I think their mother actually dies before the start of the book, but their dad ends up dying, and then it's these 2 daughters trying to survive. And it's really slow. It's beautifully written. I didn't enjoy it. That's why I gave it 2 stars. I've already sort of talked about this, so I'm not going to go too far into it. The 4th book in A Song of Ice and Fire, I gave 2 stars. It was so boring. All the perspectives I didn't care for, and then I DNF'd the 5th book. So we've already sort of covered that. Spoiler for my like series wrap up, I DNF'd the Black Dagger Brotherhood series after giving at least one of them 2 stars. My review, interesting, my review says 2.5 stars rounded up, but I ended up rounding it down. And then I said, I don't know, y'all. I think my BDB, Black Dagger Brotherhood phase is over. This is like a paranormal romance series. It's like 20-something books long. Each book follows a different guy in the Black Dagger Brotherhood, which is this like elite warrior group. I talked about this a lot at the beginning of 2024 and at the end of 2023, because that's when I read the first 3 books and really enjoyed them. I was like really liking this series, and it faded for me pretty quick. I also read the 2nd book in the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, the Vampire Lestat. I gave it 2 stars. I don't think this series is for me. I think I gave the first one 4 stars, but it was really more of a 3. And yeah, I took the rest of them off my TBR. So again, spoiler for my series DNF video, or my series catch-up video that I'm gonna do. I gave Love and Friendship by Jane Austen 2 stars. I read, in 2021, I hosted a little book club on here, and we read through all 6 of Jane Austen's full-length novels. And Love and Friendship is shorter. I did not realize she wrote this when she was a teenager, and it's also like satire about romance of the time. It just doesn't feel well written to me. But I wish I knew that before I read it, because I think I would have read it with a different lens. As it stands, I did not enjoy it, so I gave it 2 stars. Then I read Coach by Alexa Riley, which is a breeding kink romance book. 2 stars. I don't remember. Oh, I do remember what I didn't like about it. It's like the dad's friend. I don't like that dynamic. I don't like it when it's your 18-year-old daughter living in your house and you're a young dad. So you have a friend who's like in his late 30s, and your teenage daughter and him hook up. I don't like that. Something about it really icks me out. Oh, I gave a lot more 2 stars than I thought. I'm seeing a bunch. Okay, so Night of the Animals by Bill Braun. This is a literary fiction book. It's like literary dystopian. It's this guy in this futuristic world who has this thing called the float, which I think is like a drug or an alcohol of some sort that like kind of ends up muddling your brain. And he is a homeless man who's dependent on this because the government made homeless people dependent on this. You know, all a war on drugs. And he goes to the zoo in London and releases all the animals because he thinks he can hear them talking to him. Interesting concept. In my opinion, not very well executed. It was just very boring. I said it's definitely for someone, but that is not me. Never Contented Things by Sarah Porter. I gave 2 stars. This is a fae book. I heard about this from Becca in the Books. I think she got it in a book box. in 2020, 2019, something like that. But it's like, it's a foster siblings thing where the foster siblings are like in a romantic relationship, which is like the type of taboo that like I think is interesting to read. But both of the characters are extremely unlikable, and I did not get the appeal of either of them. So, and then one of them gets like taken to the Fae world and the other one has to go get them, and then it's a whole thing, and I didn't like it. So that's that. Talked about this in my December wrap up because I think I just finished these, but last 2 books in the Grace trilogy by Autumn Gray, I gave 2 stars. I did not care about them. Ooh, one of the first 2 stars of the year, Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. I gave like almost a rant review of this in my wrap up, I think, or was it in a vlog? I don't know. But this is like a productivity book about how to, I thought it was going to be about like how to cull your life online and really streamline and become more productive by like streamlining your use of the internet on your phone in particular. No, I don't know. I don't want to really get into a rant here, but like it just really rubbed me the wrong way. Oh, A Girl from Nowhere, which is the first book in the Firewall trilogy by James Maxwell. This is another like sci-fi fantasy, I guess. So it's not set on Earth. It's set on a different planet. There are like alien creatures, and it's like an adventure story. This rubbed me the wrong way because it's called A Girl from Nowhere, and I'm pretty sure the synopsis says something about like this girl who has these like magical gifts, and she's being hunted by these people. The whole book is from the perspective of and about a boy. So I hope that helps. I just didn't like it. It was not for me. It was not what it said it was going to be, and I just didn't think it was very good. The Last Thing to Burn by Will Dean. I should have DNF'd this one. I really should have. It's about this woman who is from Vietnam, I think, and she's being held captive at this British guy's house. And I don't like captive books. I don't like them. It didn't work for me. There was not like a revenge plot that made it like satisfying. If you're going to write a captive book that I'm going to enjoy, what has to happen is the escape has to happen early, and then she's got to torture the person who tortured her. Otherwise, I don't want to read it. And that's how I felt about this one. I did not like it. Hour of the Witch by Chris Bojalian. Bojalian? 2 stars. So boring. This one was, I read this for a vlog, so I don't know if I can link all the vlogs that I did this year. I read a lot in vlogs this year, but this one is about a woman in puritanical England who's accused of being a witch. And originally what happens is she marries this guy, the guy's abusive, she files for a divorce. And her divorce is not granted. And then she's accused of being a witch, and so she's tried for being a witch, for witchcraft. So this whole book is like, I would say 50 to 60% told in actual court transcripts, because this is based on a real person's court case, I think is what it is. I just found it very boring. It was just so boring. I did not care at all. It was very boring. I also gave Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca 2 stars. I almost gave this 1 star. I hated my experience reading it. The only reason it got 2 stars for me instead of 1 is because it was like so creative and different than anything I've ever read before. But for me, this was not it. I did not like it. In December, I gave Tracy Flick Can't Win by Tom Perrotta 2 stars. Again, this is a very character-driven book. I didn't care for it. It just wasn't for me. Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. I was waiting for this one to come up because I knew I gave this 2 stars. But essentially, what I said was, this was a miss for me. I guessed 2 of the 3 twists. Not the end of the world. I don't mind that. But the 3rd twist wasn't satisfying for me. It felt like a cop-out. This is one of those family stories where there's like a will being read and someone, like the matriarch of the family is like, I'm gonna die. Everyone has to come home. And then things happen. And this one, other people start dying, I'm pretty sure is what happened. But I don't know. I didn't like it, which is funny because I loved the other Alice Feeney book that I read, Rock, Paper, Scissors. So I don't know. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. Anita DeMonte Last, I gave 2 stars, which I read again in December. This one I knew I wasn't gonna love just because I heard about the actual, so this is, it's a historical fiction book about this artist who, there's 2 timelines. One timeline is the artist talking about her like volatile marriage and then her death. And it's narrated from her ghost, okay? And then the other timeline is like 15 years in the future. So that's in like the 70s and 80s. In the future timeline, it's in the like mid to late 90s. And it's about a woman who is an art history student. And she is just actually doing a dissertation on the husband. And then she finds out about the wife and how she died and all of this stuff. And she's like outraged by it. Now, this is based on a real artist's life, and her family is not happy with this book at all. I do think it's interesting that the real artist husband or whatever, he is dead now. So I don't know if that's like part of why this book is written now. But anyways, I just didn't care for it. I also didn't like the narrator, which I think I've said before. So that's it. Those are all the books that I gave less than 3 stars. Again, 3 stars for me is like the book is fine, you know? So I didn't have any huge disappointments. The biggest disappointments for me this year, the second Alice Feeney book that I read, because I really expected to like it. The Game of Thrones series as a whole was disappointing to me because, again, I thought I would at least enjoy it or find it like interesting, and I just really didn't care about it, which sucks. The Black Dagger Brotherhood series not being my favorite sucked. But other than that, I had a really good reading year. Let me know in the comments down below if you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video and how you felt about them. Also, be sure to let me know what your like most disappointing book of the year was. Like, is there a book that you were either looking forward to that you just ended up really not liking? Or is there a book that you picked up because you thought it'd be good? That's how I do most of my reading. I pick a book up because I'm like, I've heard of this. Maybe it'll be good. And then I'm not like heartbroken when I don't like it, but you know, I want to read things that I like, you know? So let me know in the comments down below what those are for you. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content from me, you can subscribe. I'm trying to get back in the habit of doing 2 videos every week, and I will see you in the next one.